right, everybody, let's talk about the Serengeti climate and hopefully allow you to come to conclusions on whether the climate could cause that incredible growth of the buffalo population seen from 1960 to about 1975, and then that drop in the buffalo population from 1975 to 2000. So the Serengeti, very beautiful place. I've never been there. Like to go, but I'm not for certain. I'm kind of a chicken. So, but if you have the chance to go, I would highly recommend that you get to go. But we're looking at the climate. And so if you remember from elementary school, climate is a long-term weather pattern over long periods of time. So the easiest way I can explain that is people, if you're from here or you've lived here for a while, you know that we have what's called a dry or Mediterranean climate here in Southern California. And what that means is we don't get a whole lot of rain. So if you travel or lived in the Northwest, like I did for about 5 years, that's a rainy, very wet climate. Way different from way down here. That means they get a lot of rain. Their temperatures don't tend to be as high either. You look at some places like that are closer to the equator than we are. Those tend to be more of a tropical. They have a thicker air. They have a lot of rain. They can get warmer. And people like to travel there at certain times of the year, usually avoiding the rainy seasons. So when we're talking about climate, we're looking long-term, not short-term, just like the graph that we looked at where we had the peak in the buffalo population and a downfall. We're looking at a range of 40 years. So when we look at this, a lot of times, and this is what I hear a lot, oh, it's dry season, wet season. Unfortunately, that would work really well if we were looking at the population over a year. We could look at the population in the wet season versus the population of the dry season. But we're looking at a population growth over from 1960 to about 1975, and then dropping again from about 1976 to 2000. So we're not looking individually at the individual dry and wet seasons. And yes, you're right. The Serengeti has a dry and wet season, and you would expect to see population changes a little bit in that. But let's actually just focus on climate here. So first of all, the climate of the Serengeti is known as subtropical. What this means is this sits just south of a tropical zone. Okay, so it's not right in the tropical zone, so we don't have hurricanes. Doesn't tend to be as humid as tropical zones tend to be, but they are still warm. And they do see rain, but not tons of it. So subtropical. So if we explain this off of what the Serengeti is, it's subtropical with a dry and relatively cool season from May to August. This is the high time that people like to travel. A warmer and still quite dry season in September to October. This would be what's known as the dry season. And a rainy and quite hot season from November to April. So there's your rainy season. If you notice, it's reverse of ours. There's a reason. I'll tell you in the next slide. So just kind of giving you this here off of Nat Geo. Our definition is subtropics are the geographic and climate zone located to the north or south of a tropical zone. So they're going to border those tropical zones. Usually they don't fall prey to, I shouldn't say fall prey, but they are not in hurricane zones. They're usually out of it. They're not as close to the equator. Anyway, so here's the continent of Africa. And the continent of Africa has part of it that sits in the northern hemisphere and part of it that sits in the southern hemisphere. And the equator travels right about here through there. And so the Serengeti, which is in Tanzania, which sits right about here in Africa, is a little south of the equator. It's south of the hemisphere. So if you notice that their hot season is in the same time as our cold season, that November, December, January, February, March time, I think it goes all the way into April, that's our winter. Well, it's their summer. So if you think Australia, a lot of people know that about Australia, but don't attach it to anything else in the southern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere and northern hemisphere will be in different seasons due to our orbit around the sun. So, and what part of the earth is closest to the sun. So at the time that we're furthest away, they're closest to. So that's their hot season when it's our cold season. All right, so average temperatures. So this park is located between 1,100 and 2,000 meters, or 3,600 and square feet. Altitude temperatures, the heat. So even though we are just south of the equator, it can be cool at night, just like us, or even colder in the highest areas in the cool season. So not unheard of to hear about snow and the Kilimanjaro and stuff like that. However, the sun is very strong and requires appropriate protection if you go. So I got these off of travel sites. It's the better part. So average temperature, looking at a year, this is taken from a safari station. It's both in Celsius and Fahrenheit, so you can do some comparisons. So our max is 84 degrees anywhere from January to March. We drop into 82 to 81 April to August. Again, this is the time when people most likely travel. It's not as wet and it's not as hot. And then we begin to climb again in September, 82. It's still not bad, okay? Those are the maxes, minimum. So looks a lot like here, right? I bet you thought you'd see it in the hundreds. Now they do have days that are going to go there, but this is the climate and it's the average. Our average temperature is not 100 degrees, but we may see hundreds of degrees during the summer, during our summer. They may too, but that's still not our average temperature. So again, these are just averages. All right, so rainfall. Now, why are we looking at rainfall and why are we looking at temperature? So, again, we're thinking about climate. How does that affect the buffalo population? I had to review the fact that buffalo eat plants. Well, what is the affect plants? Is that whole tie-in. So think temperature. Think about it. If you grow plants, what happens when they get too hot or they don't get enough sun? What might happen? Okay, so rainfall, there's another thing. We know that the plants need water. We reviewed this when we saw photosynthesis. Might even see that in the next question. So rainfall amounts are anywhere from 900 to 1,000 millimeters. So it's 35 to 40 inches per year in much of the park. And in the north, it reaches 1,400, so up to 55 inches. So more than what we get. While in the southeast, it's more arid. And so you're looking more at 31 and a half. Okay. The rainy season, which is mentioned, goes from November to April. Okay. So that's their hot season too. So it's going to be humid during that time. There's a lot of water in the air. So this isn't a time that people like to travel. Is actually divided in two with interim periods in January and February, which, however, is not very dry. In October to December, it is the short rainy season, and from March to May. But from February to April in the South Park, it is a long rain season. So consequently, in January and February, the rains diminish, though not in very pronounced way. In fact, they are still between 80 to 100 millimeters. So we do get lots of rain, but there are dry seasons, and it just depends on where you are. So remember that our rainy season actually moves in Africa where it's supposed to be, and we're looking at the Serengeti. So it's even going to move in the Serengeti. So between the north and the south, that's going to come up later. You might want to take note of that. So this may be a little hard to understand, the fact that we're not just talking about specific time ranges, but the change of where we are in the Serengeti. So once again, so we get anywhere from 35 to 40 inches and 55 inches, depending on where we're at. And it depends on where you are at what time of year to see if it's the rainy season or not. So goes from November to April. That's what we really consider the wet season. It's divided into two. So January and February isn't very dry. From October to December is considered a short rain season, and March to May, but February to April in the South Park. So if you notice that it just depends on where we are. Okay, so what does that look like in numbers? Remember, this is science. So I'm always asking about the numbers and the data. Okay, so we have millimeters, inches, and days. So average precipitation. So in January, we can have 14 average days of precipitation, anywhere from 3 to 5 inches if we go into March. Oh, look, we suddenly come to 22 in April. So notice we get kind of a jump there. We have a little decrease. June, July, and August, September, we're low, October 10, and then we start to climb again in November. So again, here's that classic rainy season that was kind of confusing in the last slide, is that 17, 16, inches, 14, 14, 18, 22. And then we start dropping May through September, October. So there's still rain going on, but there's less rain during these months. Okay. So on average, you have 157 days of rainfall or where it rains. So definitely a lot more than what we're used to here. Okay. So what does it normally mean when there's a lot of rain? That's what we're going to get into now. So remember, buffalo are herbivores. We're looking to see if the climate can affect their population.